The dust from the train hadn't even settled when Juliana Greene stepped onto the wooden platform of Lone Pine, Nevada, clutching a worn carpet bag and a one-way ticket that had cost her every last dollar she owned. Behind her lay Boston, and a scandal that had left her reputation in tatters. A broken engagement to a man whose true nature had revealed itself too late, and parents who had chosen society's opinion over their own daughter's truth. Before her stretched nothing but uncertainty and the harsh brightness of the Nevada sun in the summer of 1882. She stood there for a moment, watching the train pull away with a sense of finality that made her stomach tighten. No return ticket meant no going back, not that she had anywhere to return to. The platform cleared quickly, other passengers claimed by waiting families or heading toward the main street with purpose she didn't possess. Juliana smoothed down her traveling dress, now covered in a fine layer of dust despite her best efforts to keep it clean during the 3-day journey, and tried to gather the courage to walk into this strange new town. "You planning on standing there all day, miss?" The voice came from her left, deep and warm with a hint of amusement that wasn't quite mockery. "Because the sun only gets hotter as the day goes on." Juliana turned to find a man leaning against one of the platform posts, a stance so casual it seemed he had all the time in the world. He was tall, with broad shoulders that filled out his dusty work shirt, and wore the typical attire of a working cowboy: worn denim pants, boots that had seen better days, and a hat tilted back just enough to reveal dark hair and eyes that seemed to catch the light. His face was weathered by sun and wind, but handsome in a rugged way that was entirely different from the polished gentleman she had known back east. "I'm sorry," she said, suddenly aware that she must look completely lost. "I was just getting my bearings." "Your bearings," he repeated, pushing off from the post and walking closer. "You wouldn't happen to be Miss Greene, would you? The new school teacher?" Relief flooded through her so strongly she nearly dropped her bag. Yes, I am. Are you from the town council?" A genuine laugh escaped him, the sound surprisingly pleasant. "Not exactly. I'm Dalton Sawyer. I own a ranch about 5 miles outside town. The council asked me to come fetch you since I was already heading in to pick up supplies. They figured it would save them hiring a wagon." "That's very kind of you," Juliana said, though she felt a flicker of uncertainty about traveling alone with a stranger. But then again, her entire life now was strangers and uncertainty. What was one more step into the unknown? "Kind has nothing to do with it," Dalton said, reaching for her bag before she could protest. "I owe the mayor a favor and he called it in. My wagon's just over there. Town's about a 20-minute ride." She followed him to a sturdy wagon hitched to 2 patient-looking horses. He placed her bag in the back with an ease that spoke of strength, then offered his hand to help her up onto the seat. His palm was calloused and warm, and Juliana felt the difference between his hand and any she had held before. These were hands that worked, that built and fixed and labored under the sun. As they started down the dusty road toward town, Juliana tried not to stare at the landscape around her. Everything was so open, so vast compared to the crowded streets of Boston. The mountains in the distance seemed to touch a sky so blue it almost hurt to look at, and the sparse vegetation was nothing like the lush greenery she had known. It was beautiful in a stark, honest way that matched the fresh start she was trying to make. "First time out west?" Dalton asked, keeping his eyes on the road but clearly aware of her wide-eyed observation. That obvious. She felt heat rise to her cheeks that had nothing to do with the sun. "You have that look, like everything's surprising you." He glanced at her briefly, and she saw something softer in his expression. "It's not a bad thing. Most folks who come out here are running from something or running toward something. Both usually." His words struck closer to home than he could know, and Juliana looked down at her hands folded in her lap. "And what about you? Are you running from or toward?" "Neither. I was born here. This is just home." He said it simply, but there was pride underneath. "My father started the ranch back in '68, built it up from nothing. I took it over when he passed 3 years ago." "I'm sorry for your loss," Juliana said quietly, recognizing the brief shadow that crossed his face. "Thank you." They rode in silence for a moment before he continued. "So you're going to be teaching the town's children. That's brave work." "Brave?" Juliana couldn't help but smile slightly. "I would have thought teaching was rather ordinary." "Not out here. We've had 3 teachers in the last 2 years. None of them lasted more than a few months. Town can be rough, and the children even rougher. Parents sometimes don't see the value in book learning when there's work to be done on farms and in mines." He looked at her again, this time with what seemed like concern. "You sure you're up for it?" Something in his question made Juliana straighten her spine. She had come too far and given up too much to doubt herself now. "Mr. Sawyer, I didn't travel halfway across the country to give up at the first sign of difficulty. Whatever challenges await me, I'll face them." A slow smile spread across his face, transforming it completely. "Good. Town needs someone with some steel in their spine. And please call me Dalton. Mr. Sawyer makes me sound like my father." "Then you should call me Juliana," she replied, finding herself returning his smile despite her nervousness about everything ahead. They crested a small rise, and suddenly the town of Lone Pine spread out before them. It was smaller than she had imagined. A single main street lined with wooden buildings, a church steeple rising at one end, and scattered houses spreading out in all directions. It looked like something from a photograph, almost unreal in its simplicity compared to the bustling cities she knew. "It's not much," Dalton said, as if reading her thoughts. "But the people are mostly good, and there's honest work for those willing to do it. The mine brings in steady money, and the railroad means we're not completely cut off from the rest of the world." He guided the wagon down the main street, and Juliana was aware of people stopping to stare at them. News of the new schoolteacher had clearly spread, and she felt the weight of curious eyes following their progress. Dalton seemed unbothered by the attention, nodding to various people as they passed. He pulled up in front of a neat white building with a sign that read Lone Pine School in fresh black paint. Next to it stood a smaller structure that Juliana assumed must be the teacher's residence. Both buildings looked well maintained, which was a relief after some of the stories she had heard about frontier accommodations. "Here we are," Dalton said, jumping down from the wagon and coming around to help her down. "The mayor should be inside waiting for you. Mrs. Patterson, his wife, she's been keeping the place clean and stocked with basic supplies." Juliana accepted his help down, acutely aware of his hands on her waist, steadying and strong. "Thank you for bringing me here. I appreciate your time." "It was my pleasure, Juliana." The way he said her name, with a slight drawl that lingered on the vowels, sent an unexpected warmth through her. "I'm sure I'll be seeing you around. Town's not big enough to avoid anybody for long." Before she could respond, the school door opened and a portly man with a magnificent mustache emerged, his face wreathed in smiles. "Miss Greene, welcome. Welcome to Lone Pine. I'm Mayor Harrison Patterson. My, what a journey you must have had. Come in, and let me show you everything." As the mayor ushered her toward the building, Juliana glanced back to see Dalton lifting her bag from the wagon. He caught her looking and tipped his hat in a gesture that was both old-fashioned and charming. Then he was driving away, leaving her to face the next chapter of her new life. The mayor proved to be as verbose as his initial greeting suggested, talking nonstop as he showed her through the small schoolhouse with its neat rows of desks, the blackboard, and the shelves waiting to be filled with books. The teacher's cottage was modest but clean, with a bedroom, a sitting area, a small kitchen, and even a bathtub, which the mayor assured her was a luxury not all homes in Lone Pine possessed. "Now, school starts next Monday, giving you a week to settle in and prepare," Mayor Patterson explained, standing in the cottage's main room with his thumbs hooked in his vest. "We have about 25 children ranging from 6 to 15, though the older ones don't attend as regularly. Farm work and such, you understand." "I understand," Juliana said, though privately she thought education should take priority over labor for children. Still, she was new here and had to learn the ways of this place before she could hope to change anything. "My wife will be by tomorrow with some of the other ladies. They'll want to meet you properly, bring you some food, help you get settled." He headed toward the door, then paused. "I hope you'll be happy here, Miss Greene. Lone Pine needs someone like you, someone educated and refined. You'll be a good influence on the town." After he left, Juliana stood in the center of her new home, suddenly overwhelmed by the silence and the reality of her situation. She was entirely alone in a place where she knew no one, dependent on the charity of strangers, with a job she had never done before waiting for her. For a moment, the weight of it all pressed down on her chest, making it hard to breathe. But she had made her choice, purchased that one-way ticket with determination if not confidence, and she would see it through. Juliana began unpacking her meager belongings, trying to make the cottage feel like home. She had few possessions, having left Boston in a hurry with only what she could carry. Her books were her most precious items, and she arranged them carefully on a small shelf, their familiar spines providing comfort. That night, lying in the unfamiliar bed and listening to the unfamiliar sounds of a frontier town settling in for the night, Juliana thought about Dalton Sawyer. There had been something about him, a steadiness that seemed at odds with her preconceptions of rough cowboys. The way he had looked at her, not with the calculating assessment she had grown accustomed to in Boston's social circles, but with genuine curiosity and what might have been respect. It was a small thing, but in this strange new place, small kindnesses felt significant. The next morning brought visitors as promised. Mayor Patterson's wife, Helen, arrived with 3 other women, their arms full of baskets containing bread, preserves, a chicken already roasted, and various other offerings. They were friendly in the way of small-town women assessing a newcomer, their questions polite but probing. "You're so young," one of them, Mrs. Fletcher, said with a note of concern. "Are you quite certain you're prepared for the responsibility of teaching?" "I'm 22, Juliana replied calmly, "and I've been well educated. My father was a professor of literature before he retired. I assisted him with his students for 3 years." This seemed to satisfy them somewhat, though she caught knowing glances between the women that suggested they were wondering why a well-educated young woman from Boston would come to a small Nevada town alone. Let them wonder. Her story was her own, and she would share it only if and when she chose. The week passed in a blur of preparation. Juliana cleaned the schoolhouse thoroughly, organized the few textbooks and materials available, and planned her first lessons. She walked through town each day, learning the layout and trying to memorize faces and names. The people were cautious but not unfriendly, and she began to feel the first tentative threads of connection forming. She didn't see Dalton again until Saturday, when she was in the general store purchasing chalk and other school supplies. She was examining tablets of paper when she heard his voice behind her. "Juliana, settling in all right?" She turned to find him standing there with a bag of what looked like flour slung over one shoulder like it weighed nothing. He looked tired, she noticed, with dust coating his clothes and a shadow of stubble on his jaw, but his eyes were bright with genuine interest as he waited for her answer. "I am, thank you. Everyone has been very welcoming." She gestured to her basket of supplies. "Just preparing for Monday. I confess I'm rather nervous." "The children will love you," he said with a certainty that surprised her. "You're different from the other teachers. You actually want to be here." Did the others not want to be here? They wanted the salary and thought teaching would be easy work. When they realized it was hard and the town was small, they left on the first train out. He shifted the flour bag slightly. "But you bought a one-way ticket. That says something about your commitment." Juliana felt herself flush. How did you know it was one way? Word spreads in small towns. The station master mentioned it to someone who mentioned it to someone else. No judgment in it, he added quickly, seeing her expression. Just means you're serious about staying. They walked to the counter together, where Mr. Henderson tallied up their purchases. Dalton paid for his supplies, then lingered as she counted out her own money, painfully aware of how quickly her small savings were depleting. "Could I offer you lunch?" Dalton asked as they stepped back out into the bright sunlight. "The hotel has a decent dining room, and you've probably been living on whatever the ladies brought you all week." Juliana hesitated. It wouldn't be proper, back in Boston, for an unmarried woman to dine alone with a man. But she wasn't in Boston anymore, and the normal rules seemed to apply differently here. Besides, she realized she genuinely wanted to talk more with this man who had been kind to her from the first moment. "That would be lovely," she said. The hotel dining room was simple but clean, with checkered tablecloths and wildflowers in tin vases on each table. Several other diners were present, and Juliana noticed the speculative looks cast their way as Dalton held out a chair for her. Let them look. She was done living her life according to others' expectations and judgments. They ordered beef stew, which came with fresh bread and butter, and Juliana was surprised by how hungry she was. As they ate, they talked with an ease that seemed remarkable for two people who barely knew each other. Dalton told her about ranch life, the challenges of raising cattle in the Nevada climate, the satisfaction of building something with your own hands. She found herself fascinated by his stories, so different from anything she had experienced. "What about you?" he asked eventually, sitting back with his coffee cup cradled in his hands. "What made you leave Boston?" Juliana had known the question would come eventually. She had practiced various answers, some true, some carefully edited. But something about Dalton's steady gaze made her want to tell the truth, or at least part of it. "I was engaged to be married," she began slowly. "To a man my parents approved of greatly. He was from a good family, had excellent prospects, said all the right things. Until I discovered he was keeping a mistress and had been for years. When I confronted him, he saw no issue with it, said it was normal for men of his class to have such arrangements and I should accept it gracefully." Dalton's expression darkened. "And your parents?" "They urged me to proceed with the wedding anyway. Said I was being naive and emotional, that I would grow to accept the reality of marriage." The old anger rose in her chest, still sharp despite the weeks that had passed. "So I broke the engagement, which caused a scandal. His family blamed me, said I had been the one with improper behavior, spread rumors that I had been unfaithful. My parents believed them over me, or at least, they chose to act as if they did. Protecting our family reputation was more important than protecting me." She looked down at her hands, surprised by how much she had revealed. "I saw an advertisement for a schoolteacher in Lone Pine. It seemed like fate, a chance to start completely over where no one knew me or my supposed sins." When she looked up, Dalton was watching her with an intensity that made her breath catch. "I'm sorry you went through that," he said quietly. "And I'm sorry your family failed you, but I'm not sorry you came here." "Neither am I," Juliana said, and realized she meant it. Despite the uncertainty and fear, despite having only a one-way ticket and a precarious future, she felt more free than she had in years. "You'll never need to leave," Dalton said suddenly, his voice firm with conviction. "Lone Pine will be good to you if you give it a chance. You'll make a life here, a real one, where people judge you by who you are, not who your family is or what society says you should be." The promise in his words felt almost tangible, and Juliana found herself believing him. Not just believing that the town might accept her, but that he specifically wanted her to stay, wanted her to build a life here. The realization sent warmth spreading through her chest. "I hope you're right," she said softly. "I am." He smiled at her, that slow transformation of his face that she was coming to recognize. "Give it time. You'll see." They finished their meal talking of lighter things, and when Dalton walked her back to the schoolhouse, Juliana felt lighter than she had in months. As she watched him drive his wagon back toward his ranch, she allowed herself to acknowledge what she had been trying to ignore since that first day on the platform. She was drawn to him, to his steadiness and strength, to the way he looked at her like she was someone worth knowing rather than a decorative object or a scandalous problem. Monday morning arrived with a nervous flutter in Juliana's stomach. She dressed carefully in her most professional outfit, pinned her dark hair up neatly, and walked to the schoolhouse an hour early to make sure everything was perfect. She had lesson plans prepared, the blackboard clean and ready, and tried to calm her racing heart. The children began arriving around 8 o'clock, some brought by parents, others walking in groups or alone. They ranged from tiny 6-year-olds clutching lunch pails to nearly grown teenagers who looked at her with challenging skepticism. Juliana stood at the front of the room, greeting each one by name as they entered, having memorized the list Mayor Patterson had provided. When everyone was seated and the clock struck 8:30, she began. "Good morning. My name is Miss Greene, and I'm very pleased to be your teacher this year. I know some of you have had several teachers come and go, and you might be wondering if I'll stay. I promise you that I intend to be here as long as you'll have me. I bought a one-way ticket to Lone Pine because this is my home now." She saw several faces soften at that, the defensive walls coming down slightly. It was a start. The day was challenging but not disastrous. The younger children were enthusiastic if easily distracted, the middle group was curious and responsive, and the older students were testing her boundaries. By the time she dismissed them at 3 o'clock, Juliana was exhausted but pleased. She had survived her first day. As the last students filed out, chattering about their homework assignments, she began erasing the blackboard. She didn't hear anyone enter, so she jumped when a voice spoke behind her. "How did it go?" She spun around to find Dalton standing in the doorway, hat in hands, looking almost nervous. "Dalton, you startled me." "Sorry, door was open. I was passing through town and thought I'd check on you." He stepped inside, looking around the schoolroom with interest. "My niece Josephine is one of your students, the 10-year-old with braids." "Oh yes, she's a bright girl. Asked wonderful questions about the geography lesson." Juliana set down the eraser, pleased by his unexpected visit. "The day went well, I think. No major disasters, at least." "That's good to hear." He seemed to hesitate, then said in a rush, "There's a dance this Saturday night at the town hall. The whole town comes. I was wondering if you'd like to go with me." Juliana's heart gave an unexpected leap. A dance was a public declaration of interest, especially in a small town where everyone noticed everything. If she went with Dalton, people would talk, would make assumptions about their relationship. But hadn't she left Boston precisely to escape living under the weight of others' judgments and assumptions? Hadn't she chosen freedom over reputation? "I would love to," she said, watching his face break into a genuine smile. "Good, that's good." He actually looked relieved, which she found endearing. "I'll pick you up at 7. 7 is perfect." After he left, Juliana found herself humming as she finished tidying the classroom. The week passed in a blur of teaching and preparation. The children were becoming more comfortable with her, and she was learning how to manage the various ages and abilities in her mixed classroom. 2 of the older boys tried to cause trouble on Wednesday, but she handled it firmly and fairly, earning grudging respect. Saturday evening she dressed in her best gown, a deep blue silk that brought out her eyes. It was one of the few nice things she had brought from Boston, packed on impulse. As she pinned up her hair, leaving a few soft curls to frame her face, she barely recognized herself. Her cheeks had color from the Nevada sun, and her eyes held a brightness that had been missing for months. Dalton arrived exactly at 7, driving a cleaned wagon with a bench seat. He wore clean clothes and had clearly made an effort, his hair still damp from washing. When he saw her, he went still. "You look beautiful," he said simply, and the sincerity in his voice made her feel beautiful for the first time since the scandal. The town hall was already full of people when they arrived, music spilling out into the evening air. A fiddle and guitar played lively tunes while couples whirled around the floor. Children ran between adults' legs, laughing and playing, and tables along one wall offered punch and refreshments. Dalton kept his hand on the small of Juliana's back as they entered, a proprietary gesture that didn't go unnoticed. Several women shot her appraising looks, and she recognized some of the parents of her students. Mayor Patterson hurried over to greet them, his wife Helen in tow. "Miss Greene." "Dalton, wonderful to see you both. The children have been singing your praises all week, Miss Greene. You've made quite the impression." They chatted pleasantly for a few minutes before Dalton excused them. "I promised Juliana a dance," he said, guiding her toward the floor. He was a good dancer, confident and smooth, and Juliana let herself relax into the rhythm of the music. They moved together easily, and she was aware of his hand firm on her waist, the warmth of him close to her. "Everyone's watching us," she murmured as they turned. "Let them watch. Town's been trying to marry me off for years. They'll be pleased I finally showed interest in someone." He looked down at her, his expression serious despite the lightness of his words. "Unless it bothers you." "No," Juliana said, surprising herself with how much she meant it. "It doesn't bother me at all." They danced several songs before taking a break for punch. Various townspeople approached them, friendly and curious. Juliana met merchants and ranchers, miners and craftsmen, all the people who made up the fabric of Lone Pine. She was introduced as our new teacher, and then, increasingly as the evening went on, as Dalton's girl, which he never corrected. As the night wore on and the music slowed, Dalton pulled her close for a final dance. They moved in silence, and Juliana rested her head briefly against his shoulder, feeling safe and content in a way she hadn't expected to feel again. "Thank you for tonight," she said quietly. "Thank you for coming with me." His breath stirred her hair. "I know we haven't known each other long, but I need to be honest with you. I haven't been able to stop thinking about you since you stepped off that train. I know you came here to start over, to escape complications, and I don't want to be another complication. But I also can't pretend I don't feel what I feel." Juliana pulled back enough to look at him, her heart pounding. "What do you feel? Like maybe you were supposed to come here. Like maybe that one-way ticket was bringing you exactly where you needed to be." His eyes searched hers. "I'm not good with fancy words, but I'm honest and I work hard, and I would never treat you the way you were treated before. I can promise you that." "I believe you," Juliana whispered, knowing it was true. In the few weeks since she had arrived, Dalton had shown her more genuine respect and care than her former fiancé had in a year of courtship. He drove her home slowly, taking the long way through town as if reluctant for the evening to end. When they reached her cottage, he helped her down from the wagon and walked her to the door. "Can I see you again, soon?" he asked. "I'd be disappointed if you didn't," she replied with a smile. He grinned, then grew serious. "Juliana, I know courting is usually a slow process, especially back east. But out here, people tend to know what they want and act on it. I'm not saying we need to rush anything. I just want you to know that I'm serious about this, about you, if you're open to it." "I'm open to it," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. He lifted his hand to her cheek, his touch gentle despite the calluses. "Good night, then." "Good night, Dalton." She watched him drive away before going inside, her heart full in a way it hadn't been in so long. The cottage felt less empty now, more like a real home. As she prepared for bed, she thought about how much her life had changed in just a few short weeks. She had left Boston heartbroken and humiliated, with nothing but a one-way ticket and desperate hope. Now she had a home, a job she was growing to love, and the possibility of something more with a man who looked at her like she was precious. The following weeks fell into a pattern that felt right. Juliana taught during the weekdays, pouring her energy into her students and finding genuine joy in their progress. The older boys who had tested her became her most dedicated students once she earned their respect. The younger children adored her, and even the skeptical parents began to warm to her methods. Dalton came to town at least twice a week, always finding reasons to stop by the schoolhouse. Sometimes he brought his niece to school in the morning and stayed to chat. Other times he appeared in the afternoon with some excuse about needing supplies. The town quickly understood they were courting, and most seemed to approve. On Sundays after church, Dalton would take her for drives in his wagon, showing her the landscape around Lone Pine. They rode out to his ranch one October afternoon, and Juliana fell in love with the place immediately. It was situated in a valley with a stream running through it, the main house built solidly of timber with a wide porch. Fenced pastures stretched in all directions, dotted with cattle. "My father built this with his own hands," Dalton said as they stood on the porch looking out over the land. "Started with nothing but determination and a piece of property no one else wanted. He made it into something real, something lasting." "It's beautiful," Juliana said honestly. "You can feel the love and work that went into it." He looked at her intently. "Could you see yourself living here?" The question hung in the air between them. They had been courting for 6 weeks now, and while neither had spoken explicitly of marriage, it had been there beneath every conversation, every touch, every shared smile. "Yes," Juliana said simply. "I could." Relief and joy transformed his face. "I know it soon. People back east would probably think we're rushing. But out here, when you know something is right, you don't wait around pretending otherwise." He took both her hands in his. "I love you, Juliana. I think I started falling for you the moment you stepped off that train looking lost and brave all at once. I want to marry you if you'll have me. I want to build a life with you here, raise a family, grow old together." Tears sprang to Juliana's eyes, but they were happy tears. "I love you too. I didn't think I could feel this way again after everything that happened. You've shown me what it means to be truly valued, truly seen. Yes, Dalton. Yes, I'll marry you." He pulled her into his arms and kissed her, gentle at first, then deepening with all the emotion they had been holding back. When they finally broke apart, both were breathless and smiling. "We'll do it properly," Dalton promised. "I'll talk to the mayor and the reverend. We can be married before winter sets in properly, start our life together right." News of their engagement spread through Lone Pine like wildfire. The women of the town threw Juliana a party, bringing gifts and advice. Mrs. Patterson hemmed a beautiful white dress that had belonged to her own daughter. Dalton's sister Margaret, Josephine's mother, welcomed Juliana warmly into the family. "I'm so glad it's you," Margaret told her one afternoon over tea. "Dalton's been alone too long, throwing himself into ranch work and nothing else. You've brought him back to life." They were married on a crisp November morning in the little white church, with what seemed like the entire town in attendance. Juliana wore the altered white dress and carried wildflowers that had somehow survived the first frost. Dalton looked impossibly handsome in a new suit, his eyes never leaving her face as she walked down the aisle. Reverend Thompson performed the ceremony, and when Dalton kissed his bride, the church erupted in applause and cheers. Juliana felt overwhelmed by joy and gratitude. 8 months ago, she had been broken and lost. Now she was married to a man she loved deeply, surrounded by a community that had accepted her, starting a life she had never imagined. The reception was held at the town hall, with food and dancing and celebration. As Juliana waltzed with her new husband, she caught sight of the train station through the window. The same platform where she had stood so uncertain and afraid, clutching that one-way ticket. "What are you thinking?" Dalton asked, following her gaze. "About that day I arrived. How scared I was. How I didn't know if I had made a terrible mistake." She smiled up at him. "You were right, you know, I never needed to leave. You promised me that, and you were right." "I'll always keep my promises to you," he said seriously. "Always." They spent their wedding night at the ranch, in the home that was now theirs together. Dalton carried her over the threshold with a reverence that made her heart ache in the best way. He was gentle and patient, showing her what love truly meant, erasing the last shadows of her past pain. In the days and weeks that followed, Juliana settled into her new life with a happiness she had never known possible. She continued teaching through the end of the school term, but now she rode out to the ranch each afternoon, helping Dalton with various tasks and learning the rhythms of ranch life. The women of Lone Pine taught her how to can and preserve food for winter, how to bake bread in a cast-iron Dutch oven, how to manage a frontier household. Margaret became like the sister Juliana had never had, and Josephine delighted in having an aunt who was also her former teacher. Winter came with cold winds and occasional snow, and Juliana loved the cozy evenings by the fire with Dalton. They would sit together after dinner, her reading while he worked on tack or accounts, comfortable in companionable silence or easy conversation. He told her stories of growing up on the ranch, of his father's determination and his mother's strength. She shared more about her life in Boston, the good memories now easier to access without the bitterness of her leaving. "You miss it?" he asked one evening. "The city, the culture, all that." "Sometimes I miss the libraries and museums," she admitted. "But I don't miss the life. I don't miss feeling like I was always being watched and judged, like I had to perform rather than simply be myself." She looked at him across the firelight. "Here I can breathe, I can be real. That's worth more than all the culture in the world." Spring came with a rush of new life. The ranch was busy with calving season, and Juliana learned to help where she could. She discovered she had a knack for the account books, organizing Dalton's somewhat chaotic record-keeping into a system that made sense. He teased her about being too educated for ranch work, but his gratitude was genuine. In April, Juliana realized she was pregnant. The knowledge filled her with a complex mix of joy and fear. She told Dalton one evening after dinner, watching his face carefully for his reaction. He went completely still for a moment, then a slow smile spread across his face. Truly, we're going to have a baby. Truly, she confirmed and found herself swept up in his arms, spun around until she laughed and begged him to put her down. A baby, he kept saying, wonder in his voice. Our baby. Juliana, you've made me the happiest man alive. You're not worried, she asked, voicing her own fears. We've only been married 6 months. People will count. Let them count. We're married, we love each other, and we're having a child. That's all that matters. He placed his hand gently on her still flat stomach. This baby is a blessing, pure and simple. His certainty eased her own worries, and Juliana allowed herself to fully embrace the joy. They told Margaret and Josephine, then the rest of the town gradually learned. The women rallied around her with advice and offers of help, already planning for the baby's arrival. Summer was hot and long, and Juliana found pregnancy challenging in the Nevada heat. She stopped teaching with the end of the school term, spending her days at the ranch helping where she could but mostly preparing for the baby. Dalton was attentive to the point of being overprotective, constantly worried she was doing too much or working too hard. I'm pregnant, not ill, she reminded him repeatedly, but she loved him for his concern. She also wrote letters, the first communication with her parents since she had left Boston. She told them about her marriage, about the baby, about her new life. She tried to keep the bitterness out of her words, simply sharing the facts of her happiness. She didn't know if they would respond, but it felt important to reach out, to try to bridge the gap that had formed. The baby came in late November, almost exactly a year after her wedding day. Labor was long and difficult with Margaret and Mrs. Patterson attending while Dalton paced anxiously outside. But when their son finally arrived, squalling and red-faced and perfect, Juliana felt a love so overwhelming it brought tears to her eyes. A boy, Margaret announced, carrying the wrapped bundle to where Dalton was allowed to finally enter. A healthy, strong boy. Dalton approached the bed where Juliana lay exhausted but radiant, taking his son with hands that trembled slightly. He's perfect, he whispered. You're perfect. Thank you. They named him David after Dalton's father. David Sawyer, the first of what they hoped would be several children. As Juliana watched her husband cradle their newborn son, watched the tears stream unashamedly down his face, she thought about the journey that had brought her here. The pain and humiliation that had driven her from Boston, the one-way ticket that had seemed like an act of desperation, the fear and uncertainty of those first days in Lone Pine. All of it had led her here, to this moment, to this life. She was exactly where she was supposed to be. The winter after David's birth was challenging, but happy. Juliana adjusted to motherhood with Margaret's help, learning to balance the demands of a newborn with the needs of a ranch household. Dalton was a devoted father, coming in from work to hold his son, talking to the baby about cattle and horses and the land that would someday be his. In February, a letter arrived from Boston. Juliana's hand shook as she opened it, recognizing her mother's handwriting. The letter was brief but momentous. Her parents wanted to reconcile, wanted to meet their grandson, wanted to be part of her life again if she would allow it. They acknowledged they had failed her, chosen wrong when it mattered most, and they were deeply sorry. Juliana read the letter 3 times, emotions warring within her. The old hurt was still there, but so was a tentative hope. She showed it to Dalton, needing his counsel. "What do you want to do?" he asked, always putting her needs and feelings first. "I want to write back," she said slowly. "I want to try. I don't know if we can ever have what we had before, but maybe we can build something new. David deserves to know his grandparents if possible." "Then that's what we'll do," Dalton agreed. "And if they want to visit, they're welcome here. This is your home now, and they need to accept that." She wrote back that same afternoon, a careful letter that was honest about her hurt but open to rebuilding their relationship. The correspondence that followed was tentative at first, then warmer. In the spring, her parents sent gifts for David and longer letters sharing news of Boston. They never asked her to return, seeming to understand that chapter of her life was closed permanently. As David grew from an infant into a toddler, Juliana found herself increasingly involved in town life. She helped organize a lending library, started a women's reading circle, and occasionally taught special evening classes for adults who wanted to improve their reading and mathematics. The town had become truly home, the people her extended family. On a warm summer evening, when David was almost 2 years old, Juliana stood on the ranch porch watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink. Dalton came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist and pulling her back against his chest. "Happy?" he asked, as he often did. "Completely," she answered, as she always did, because it was true. She thought about the girl who had stepped off the train 3 years ago with nothing but a carpet bag and a one-way ticket. That Juliana had been broken and frightened, running away from pain with no clear idea of what she was running toward. She had thought she was simply escaping, surviving, but she had been wrong. She hadn't been running away at all. She had been running toward this, toward Dalton and David, toward a home and a community and a life richer than anything she had known before. The one-way ticket hadn't been an ending but a beginning. "What are you thinking?" Dalton asked, pressing a kiss to her temple. "About promises kept," she said softly. "You told me I would never need to leave, and you were right. I found everything I needed right here." "No," he corrected gently. "You brought everything you needed with you, the courage, the strength, the heart. Lone Pine just gave you the space to let it all flourish." She turned in his arms to face him, reaching up to cup his face. "We gave each other the space to flourish. I couldn't have done any of this without you." "We make a good team," he agreed, then kissed her with the easy affection of long familiarity mixed with passion that hadn't dimmed. From inside the house came David's voice calling for them, and they broke apart with shared smiles. Their life was full and busy and occasionally challenging, but it was theirs, built together from nothing but hope and hard work and love. As they went inside to their son, Juliana sent a silent thank you to whatever Providence had guided her to buy that one-way ticket to Lone Pine, Nevada. It had been the best decision she had ever made, the first step on a journey that had brought her home to a place she had never known existed, but had been waiting for all along. The years continued to unfold with the steady rhythm of ranch life. When David was 3, Juliana became pregnant again. This time the pregnancy was easier, her body knowing what to expect. In the spring of 1886, they welcomed a daughter whom they named Grace, with dark hair like her mother and her father's steady disposition. Margaret's daughter Josephine, now 15, was invaluable help with the children, spending summers at the ranch and developing a close bond with her young cousins. The relationship between Juliana and her sister-in-law had deepened into genuine friendship, the kind of easy companionship that needed no pretense. The ranch continued to prosper under Dalton's management and Juliana's organizational skills. They expanded the herd gradually, built a new barn, and improved the irrigation system along the creek. It was hard work, but satisfying in a way that Juliana had never experienced in her former life. There was something deeply fulfilling about building something tangible, about seeing the direct results of effort and planning. Juliana's parents did eventually visit when Grace was 6 months old. It was awkward at first, the years of hurt and silence standing between them like a wall. But watching her father hold his granddaughter with tears in his eyes, seeing her mother's genuine remorse and attempts to connect, Juliana felt the old anger finally begin to dissolve. "I was wrong," her father said simply one evening after the children were in bed. "About everything. About what mattered. About what I asked you to accept. About choosing reputation over your happiness. I've regretted it every day since you left." "We both have," her mother added. "We failed you as parents. We can't undo that, but we hope you can forgive us in time." "I already have," Juliana said, surprising herself with how much she meant it. "I was angry for a long time, but I'm not anymore. What happened brought me here, and I can't regret that. This life, this family, this is everything I never knew I wanted." Her parents stayed for 2 weeks, and by the time they left, a tentative new relationship had been established. They would never have what they once had, but they had something different, something perhaps more honest because it had been broken and rebuilt. As her children grew, Juliana sometimes helped with teaching again, taking on students in her home or assisting the new teacher in town with special subjects. She loved sharing knowledge, loved seeing young minds open to new ideas. David showed an early aptitude for reading, often found curled up with a book in unexpected places. Grace was more practical, trailing after her father to help with ranch work as soon as she could walk. When David was 8 and Grace was 5, Juliana became pregnant once more. This pregnancy was harder, her body older and more tired. Dalton worried constantly, but she felt confident everything would be fine. In November of 1891, she gave birth to twin boys, Thomas and Henry, completing their family in a way that felt perfect. 4 children, Dalton said, sitting on the bed with a twin in each arm while David and Grace peered at their new brothers with fascination. "We've built ourselves quite a family." "We have," Juliana agreed, looking at the scene with profound contentment. "A beautiful family." The ranch now was a busy, noisy place, full of children's laughter and activity. They added rooms to the house to accommodate everyone, and Juliana loved every corner of it. This home, which she had first seen less than a year after arriving in Lone Pine, had become the center of her world. The town continued to grow and change around them. New families arrived, new businesses opened, the railroad brought more connection to the wider world. But Lone Pine retained its essential character, the sense of community and mutual support that had welcomed Juliana all those years ago. She and Dalton attended town meetings and socials, now as established members of the community rather than newcomers. Their children grew up surrounded by people who knew and cared for them. It was the kind of childhood Juliana had wanted for her children, full of freedom and fresh air and genuine affection. On the 10th anniversary of her arrival in Lone Pine, Dalton surprised her with a gift. It was a painting, commissioned from an artist who had passed through town, depicting the train station platform. In the painting, a young woman stood with a carpet bag, looking uncertain but determined, while in the background a cowboy leaned against a post, watching her. "That's us," Juliana breathed, studying the image. "That first day." "I wanted you to remember," Dalton said. "Remember where we started so you can see how far we've come. I could never forget." She looked at the painting with tears in her eyes. "That day changed everything." "I was so scared, Dalton. I felt like I was jumping off a cliff with no idea where I would land." "You landed exactly where you were supposed to," he said, putting his arm around her. "Right here with me." They hung the painting in the parlor, and it became a favorite topic of conversation when visitors came. The children loved hearing the story of how their parents met, never tiring of the details. As the years continued to pass, Juliana watched her children grow into remarkable people. David inherited his father's steadiness and his mother's love of learning, planning to attend university to study agriculture, and then return to help run the ranch. Grace was spirited and independent, a skilled rider who could work cattle as well as any hand they employed. The twins, Thomas and Henry, were inseparable and kept everyone entertained with their antics. Juliana's relationship with her parents slowly healed. They visited every few years, and she and Dalton made one trip back to Boston when the twins were 5, wanting the children to see that part of their heritage. But the visit only reinforced how completely her life had changed. Boston felt foreign to her now, too crowded and complicated. She was relieved to board the train home, back to the wide open spaces of Nevada. "Never want to go back?" Dalton asked as they watched the city disappear behind them. "Never," she confirmed. "Everything I need is in Lone Pine." Margaret passed away suddenly when Juliana was 42, a shock that devastated them all. Josephine, now married with children of her own, leaned heavily on Juliana during that difficult time. The loss reminded them all of life's fragility, of how precious their time together was. "We're not promised tomorrow," Dalton said one night after the funeral, holding Juliana close. "We only have today right now. I don't want to waste a single moment." "We won't," Juliana promised. "We'll live fully, love fully for as long as we're given," and they did. As their children grew into adults, as grandchildren began to arrive, Juliana and Dalton's love remained the foundation of it all. They still took evening walks together, still sat by the fire talking, still looked at each other with the same affection and desire that had drawn them together decades before. On their 25th wedding anniversary, the whole town celebrated with them. It was a testament to how much they were loved and respected in Lone Pine. Friends and neighbors brought food and gifts, sharing stories and laughter. Juliana looked around at the crowd, at the life they had built together, and felt overwhelming gratitude. "Speech." Someone called out, and the crowd took up the chant. Juliana looked at Dalton, who nodded encouragingly. She stood, suddenly shy despite knowing everyone present. 25 years ago, I stepped off a train with nothing but a carpetbag and a one-way ticket," she began, her voice growing stronger as she continued. "I was running from pain and shame, with no real plan beyond escape. I thought I was leaving everything behind. But what I didn't know was that I was actually running toward everything I would ever need." She looked at Dalton, her eyes shining. "This man, who I had just met, promised me something that day. He said I would never need to leave, that Lone Pine would be good to me, and he was right. More right than I could have imagined. I found not just a home here, but a family, a community, a purpose. I found love, real love, the kind that sustains and supports and grows stronger with time." Tears were streaming down her face now, but she was smiling. "So thank you, all of you, for welcoming me, for accepting me, for making me one of your own. And thank you, Dalton, for being the kind of man who keeps his promises, who loves completely, who has given me the most wonderful life imaginable." The crowd erupted in applause and cheers. Dalton stood and pulled her into his arms, kissing her soundly while their children groaned in mock embarrassment, and everyone else laughed and clapped. That night, lying in bed with Dalton's arm around her, Juliana thought about that young woman who had stepped off the train 25 years ago. How frightened she had been, how uncertain about the future. If she could go back and tell that young woman what awaited her, would she even believe it? "What would you tell her?" Dalton asked when she shared the thought. "Your younger self," Juliana considered. "I would tell her to trust. To have faith that the worst thing that ever happened to her would lead to the best thing. I would tell her that buying that one-way ticket was the bravest, smartest thing she would ever do." She rolled over to face him. "And I would tell her that the cowboy at the train station, the one watching her with curious eyes, that he's going to change everything and she should let him." "I think she would have listened," Dalton said softly. She was smart, that young woman. She knew a good thing when she saw it. Or she was desperate and lucky, Juliana laughed. Or she was exactly where she was supposed to be, meeting exactly who she was supposed to meet. He kissed her forehead. I believe in fate, in things happening for a reason. You were meant to come here, and I was meant to be waiting for you. As Juliana drifted off to sleep, safe and warm and loved, she sent up a prayer of thanks for one-way tickets and second chances, for small towns and big hearts, for cowboys who keep their promises and love that lasts a lifetime. The years continued their steady march. David took over more of the ranch operations as Dalton began to slow down, though he remained active and involved. Grace married a neighboring rancher and settled nearby, bringing her own children to visit frequently. The twins went into business together, opening a successful mercantile in town. Juliana became a grandmother many times over, loving the role as much as she had loved being a mother. She taught her grandchildren to read, told them stories of Boston and of their family history, passed on the lessons she had learned. When she was 65, Juliana finally wrote a full account of her journey to Nevada, of everything that had happened since she bought that one-way ticket. She wrote it as a gift for her grandchildren, wanting them to know the full story of how their family began. She wrote about heartbreak and scandal, about fear and courage, about taking risks and building a life from nothing. And she wrote about love. Real, lasting, transformative love. The kind that makes everything else worthwhile. Dalton read the manuscript when she finished, tears streaming down his weathered face. You remember it all so clearly, he marveled. How could I forget? Juliana replied. Every moment with you has been precious. Every day has been a gift. They celebrated their 40th anniversary, surrounded by children and grandchildren, a tribe of their own making. The ranch that had once belonged to just Dalton now belonged to all of them, a legacy being passed down through generations. We built something that will last, Dalton said that night, the two of them alone on the porch watching the sun set over land they knew as well as their own hearts. Not just the ranch, but this family, this legacy of love and hard work and commitment. You built it, Juliana corrected. Your father started it, you continued it, and now our children will carry it forward. We built it together, he insisted. From the moment you arrived, it became ours. You brought something to this place to me that I didn't even know was missing. You made it complete. They sat in comfortable silence, hands clasped, watching the day fade into night. They had lived a good life, a full life, rich in everything that truly mattered. When they celebrated their 50th anniversary, the entire town turned out once again. Juliana was 72 now, Dalton 75, both slowed by age but still sharp and engaged. They had 11 grandchildren and 3 great-grandchildren, with more on the way. At the celebration, their children presented them with a surprise. A new sign for the ranch, one that reads Sawyer Ranch ESD, 1868, where love began with a one-way ticket. We wanted to commemorate the story, David explained. It's part of who we are as a family. Juliana and Dalton stood together, looking at the sign and then at each other. 50 years of marriage, of building a life together, of love that had sustained them through every challenge and joy. Would you do it again? She asked him. Everything exactly the same, in a heartbeat, he answered without hesitation. Every moment, every day. I'd do it all again just to end up right here with you. Me too, she whispered. Me too. As the celebration continued around them, Juliana thought about promises kept and dreams fulfilled. She thought about that one-way ticket that had seemed like such a risk, such a leap into the unknown. She had spent everything she had on passage to a place she had never seen, with no plan for return. And Dalton had been right, all those years ago when he made his promise. She had never needed to leave. Lone Pine had become home in every sense of the word. The ranch had become her heart. And the cowboy who had greeted her that first day had become her everything. They lived several more years, watching their family continue to grow and flourish. When Dalton passed away peacefully in his sleep at 79, Juliana mourned deeply, but without regret. They had been given more than half a century together, had built a life beyond anything she could have imagined that day she stepped off the train. She stayed at the ranch, surrounded by family, active and engaged in their lives. On warm summer evenings, she would sit on the porch and think about Dalton, about their extraordinary, ordinary life together. She would look at the painting of that first day, at the young woman and the watchful cowboy, and smile at all they hadn't yet known. When Juliana passed away 2 years after Dalton, peaceful and ready, she was laid to rest beside him in the Lone Pine Cemetery. Their shared headstone bore a simple inscription chosen by their children. Together they built a life, together forever. But their real legacy wasn't in stone. It was in the ranch that continued to thrive under David's management, in the grandchildren and great-grandchildren who carried forward their values and their love. It was in the town of Lone Pine, which still told the story of the Boston lady and the cowboy who promised she would never need to leave. It was in the painting that hung in the ranch house, passed down through generations, a reminder of where it all began. With a one-way ticket, a moment of courage, and a promise kept, the story of Juliana and Dalton became part of Lone Pine's history, told and retold until it took on the quality of legend. Young girls dreamed of finding love like theirs. Young men tried to emulate Dalton's steadfast devotion. And everyone who heard the tale was reminded that sometimes the worst moments of our lives lead directly to the best, that courage can be rewarded, and that true love, when found, is worth everything. The one-way ticket that had seemed like an ending had been a beginning. The promise that had seemed too good to be true had been kept every single day. And the love that had bloomed in the Nevada desert had lasted beyond a lifetime, creating ripples that spread through generations. Juliana Greene, who had left Boston broken and ashamed, had found in Lone Pine everything she had ever needed: home, family, purpose, and a love that transformed her completely. Dalton Sawyer, who had been waiting without knowing he was waiting, had found in her the other half of himself. Together, they had proven that sometimes the best things in life come from the biggest risks. That home isn't a place you're born, but a place you choose, and that promises made from the heart are promises that last forever. Their great-great-grandchildren still live on the ranch today, still tend the land Dalton's father first claimed, still tell the story of how it all began. With a dusty platform, a carpetbag, a one-way ticket, and a cowboy who knew how to make and keep a promise. "You'll never need to leave," he had told her. And she never did, because she had finally found where she truly belonged.